it is widely believed that Erdogan is seeking support from the Kurdish, from like Kurdish backing, because there's an election in 3 years, and it's believed that he wants to change the constitution to be able to run again. So it's a major step, but what happens next is really crucial.
For Turkey, the seeming end of a 40-year conflict with PKK militants has come, as that group says it's to lay down weapons and disband. It's a move that could alter the course of conflicts across the region and flags up Turkey's growing diplomatic heft. Today with me is Liz Cookman, who reports from Istanbul for The Times. Liz, welcome.
Hi.
Just how big a deal is the end of the PKK's armed struggle?
Yeah, it's a really big deal. The PKK has been fighting the Turkish state for over 40 years. Tens of thousands of people have died. Nobody knows exact figures, but it's thought that over 40,000 people have died, including around 8,000 since 2015, according to conflict monitors. So this is the first time that they have come this far with any kind of peace negotiations. They have had them before, but they've usually collapsed after a while. And it could finally mean an end to one of the world's longest running conflicts. It's not over yet. They've made it clear that disarmament depends on how the Turkish government responds, especially around Kurdish rights. And it's a bit of a mystery what the Turkish government has agreed to in terms of concessions that they're willing to give the Kurdish side. They say they've given nothing, but it is widely believed that Erdogan is seeking support from the Kurdish, Kurdish backing, because there's an election in 3 years, and it's believed that he wants to change the constitution to be able to run again. So it's a major step, but what happens next is really crucial.
It feels like it's been a belter of a year for Turkey's President Erdogan. Turkey playing a crucial role in so many conflicts now. How important has Turkey become diplomatically?
Yeah, he had an incredible week a few weeks ago when the Russia-Ukraine peace talks were here, and at the same time he'd helped mediate between India and Pakistan, and he'd helped release a hostage from Gaza, and also the PKK deal, all in the space of 1 week. So yeah, he was looking pretty incredible at that time. So Turkey's become a key diplomatic player, and mainly that's because they have this ability to generally speak to all sides. So experts or analysts often call this Turkey's 360 strategy, where they try to maintain relationships with everybody. It's also a NATO member. It has working ties with Russia, which is quite rare at the moment, and it also plays a central role in the Middle East. So all of these places are really important to geopolitics at the moment, and that's helped Turkey rise. And also, it's been heavily influenced by the re-election of Trump, who Erdogan has quite a good relationship with. They've had tensions, they've had difficulties, but I think Trump, he tends to have a good relationship with authoritarians. They share some similar political strategies, so they seem to get each other, and that's really helped bring Erdogan in from the cold, because for several years he was kind of in isolation due to human rights issues in his own country, and a lot of people didn't want to be seen dealing with him. Then also Turkey controls the Black Sea, which is extremely important to grain exports, and again the Russia-Ukraine war, and then it's had a key role for the last 10 years in migration. So it houses the world's largest refugee population, with millions of people from Syria, from Afghanistan, from Sudan, and that gives it a lot of leverage over Europe. So there's a lot of global flashpoints that come together that give it this kind of importance right now.
You touched on relations between Erdogan and Trump. Turkey and the US backed different sides in Syria, but now Donald Trump's given thumbs up to Syria's new leader, who was long backed by Turkey. Does this mean relations are fixed between Washington and Ankara?
I think they've always had a complicated and at times tempestuous relationship. Erdogan has built a lot of his domestic support on an image of him standing up to the West. he talks openly, and he did after the Russia-Ukraine talks, about how he is playing a key role in reshaping the global order, as he puts it. And local state TV talks regularly about how the focus of global power is shifting from the US to the Middle East and Turkey. And so although he maintains a good relationship with the US, he also uses it as a tool to leverage support internally, being anti-Western or anti-US as a way to leverage support internally. So it's kind of complicated, and I think it always has the ability to sort of tip the wrong way.
So for Erdogan, he met with Syria's new leader, Sharaa, at the weekend. As we said, a man who was heavily backed by Turkey in Syria's civil war. I remember reading your reporting from Damascus as Assad fell. How does Turkey's involvement in the rise of Sharaa tip the balance of power in Turkey's neighborhood? I mean, Israel seems to suggest it really doesn't like Sharaa at all.
Well, Turkey has had a long-running relationship with Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. They deny any involvement with the rebel operation to take Damascus and to topple Assad, although it seems fairly clear that they did at least know about it and perhaps gave the green light. So they're well positioned in terms of from the very start, they had these open communications with Sharaa and HTS, which other people didn't have. There was some talk that, in fact, when Biden wanted to talk to Sharaa, he came to Turkey to be put in touch with him. So he was in there very early with that strong position, and they've, since the start of the Syrian war, they have backed opposition. They have never been fans of Assad, although there was some pressure to normalise with him just before the recent events. So, you know, it's very much in Turkey's interest also to stabilise Syria and to help build a stronger Syria, because Syria is on its border. Again, there are millions of Syrians that now live in Turkey. There is a generation of Syrians that were born in Turkey. And there also was, for many years, a lot of security threats to Turkey because of the situation in Syria, both from the Kurdish rebels, who some of them were stationed in northeastern Syria, but also there were a series of terror attacks in Turkey carried out by ISIS in sort of 2015, 2016. So it's really important for them to stabilise Syria. And it's also, Turkey is very keen to play a big role in terms of, the construction and the rebuilding of Syria. So, yeah.
I suppose if we pull back the end of the Kurdish conflict, how does the end of fighting the PKK perhaps bolster Turkey's prestige and influence in the neighbourhood? Has that improved?
Yeah, well, it's not fully over yet, but it's certainly a big step towards it. And it really boosts Turkey's hand regionally in a big way, because for decades it's been fighting this insurgency, which has been a huge drain on resources and on its regional relationships, because the PKK many of them were based in Syria and Iraq, which caused a lot of diplomatic issues between the Turkey and Syria, Turkey and Iraq, and Turkey and especially northern Iraq, where there's a big PKK presence, and also with the West, because the Turkey's heavy-handed response to the PKK in recent years has led to a lot of accusations of human rights abuses. There are areas of the southeast that were heavily subjected to heavy military operations, and it was very unpopular outside of Turkey. So this now gives them the chance to focus much more on diplomacy, on power projection abroad, rather than fighting this sort of endless internal war. Erdogan is really keen to build a trade route through Iraq called the Development Road. And so the plan for that is that it would stretch from Basra Port through Iraq, through Turkey, and eventually to Europe. And that could be worth, huge amounts of income for all of those involved. And that was impossible until now, because it went through PKK territory and it was too risky. And international investors would not get behind something, shipments that could get hijacked by the PKK or get exposed to conflict. So with that over, that opens the door to this this route, which is going to bring a lot of development to the region.
I suppose Turkey's position within NATO has come to a prominence that we haven't seen in a long time. Turkey has the second largest army in NATO, and Europe is worrying about US support for the alliance. What do you make of that? Is there a sense Turkey's moment has come?
Yeah, I think definitely. I mean, Turkey has a large, experienced military. Unlike most of Europe, conscription is still a thing here. A lot of young men join the military for usually around 15 months. And Turkey also has this key location where they're kind of at the crossroads between Europe and Asia. And so that's made it really indispensable for regional security. Again, it controls the sea routes, such as the Bosphorus. There are important NATO bases here. There's a rapidly growing defence industry as well. So Turkish drones and naval ships have become really important globally, particularly, most famously, probably the Bayraktar drones, which played a key role early on in the Ukraine conflict and also in Nagorno-Karabakh before. And so, yeah, when Europe has some issues with defence spending, defence spending has fallen to quite small amounts of GDP, although I know there's a lot of pressure for that to change. That means Turkey has become extremely important.
For me, I struggle to remember a time when President Erdogan wasn't leading Turkey. If we think about the constitution, his 25-year stretch looks set to end in 2028. Will Turkey's global mediator role continue, or is it just right place, right time for now?
So Turkey has actually long had this strategy of no problems at home, no problems abroad. So the idea has always been, since Ataturk founded the Turkish Republic in the 1920s, the idea has always been to be friends with everybody. So that's something that probably will remain. But whether Erdogan will leave office in 2028 is a different question. So there's obviously been huge anti-government protests here recently, which I covered, and I also interviewed Özgür Özel, who is the leader of the opposition. So they broke out after the Istanbul mayor, who was considered to be pose the most significant threat to Erdogan at the next election. He was imprisoned. He's now being held on corruption charges. So Erdogan has made some comments recently that he won't be running for election again, but it seems to a lot of people that this may be part of a strategy. Few believe, an entire generation of adults has only ever known Erdogan in power. And in that time, for many of them, their human rights have declined, opportunities have declined, and people are really... Certain people, especially people around the kind of metropolitan areas like Istanbul, are really keen for a change. But that being said, Erdogan still has an incredibly strong supporter base, mainly of conservative religious Turks. And the idea of him stepping down seems slightly at odds with his past approach to politics.
And I suppose his deal with the PKK cements that for another few years at least.
Right. It's widely believed that the motivation from the Turkish side, apart from the developmental and conflict resolution side of it, was motivated by a want for Kurdish backing, both in the election, but also there is some talk about how Erdogan is seeking to change the constitution. So he previously was Prime Minister. He ran out of terms in office under the constitution. He then became president, and he changed the country's constitution to change the president from a figurehead role to an active role. He now wants to. It is thought that he now would want to change the constitution again because he's run out of terms again, to be able to extend his time in office. It's not clear at the moment because, if an early election is called, he will also be able to run again because he won't have completed his second term. But yeah, it's widely believed that he is seeking Kurdish backing to be able to get enough votes in parliament to seek this constitutional change.